Good evening. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all. Boys and girls, please be quiet. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon. It is wonderful to have this crowd. So what we've learned a lesson. If we could get Dolores every week, we could do this every week. So we'd be thrilled to death. Really, we want to think of all of the people who are coming today. And I think that when you look at the fact that the bank has been working with us, go back and tell them, Chris, that they need to slack off just a little bit. We don't want to do that much. But what it is the reputation of Dolores. We'll change the name of the whole program later on, but when Dolores is coming, we have a good turnout. You know, the thing about Dolores, we know that she's from Reading, Pennsylvania, and she has lived in Pennsylvania, and she's been everywhere else. She's one of the featured people at the Tennessee National Storytellers Awards. She has done all the wonderful things and the exciting things that anybody's ever done. But today I want you to know that she's going to take you all somewhere else. And it's a journey that we can only take in the mind until she brings it to life. It's a journey that it will make you think of the past, make you wish you had had better upbringing and better. But the thing about it is when you've had the best, there's all the rest. And Dolores, darling, you are the best. Get into it.
Thank you, Dr. Ted. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ted. Thanks to Tracy and Dr. Shirley. And I'm especially grateful for the big sign out front that said free beer. Because I know that that's why you're here. Thank you so much. I don't know if you noticed, I took a picture of y'all before you're coming in, and I was telling somebody, I need this picture because just yesterday, I had sent out my shameless self-promotion email list, and I got back, take me off this list. So every time I get one of those, I'm going to look at this picture, and so thank you for that. By the way, I do have a email list, and it's over there on the table. And if you're not already on it, I would love to let you know about things coming up. There's lots coming up in the springtime and summer. And so I'd love to let you know about that. So if you're not already on that list, let me know how to get in touch with you. But thank you for coming out today for this story. I'm going to get up here. I think it might be a little bit easier for me to see you and you to see me. This is a love story. They are all love stories, as far as I'm concerned. If I'm going to come up with a new story to tell you, I first have to fall in love. I have to fall in love with the topic or the person or the memory, because if I don't love it, I can't justify the time. Not just the time it's going to take me to come up with the story, but the time I'm going to ask of you to listen to it. And so it was early 2017. Remember back that far? Early 2017. And I wanted a new story. And so I set out to fall in love. I wanted to fall in love with Irene Castle. It all started because of a dress, a purple sequined evening gown that some of you have heard me talk about before, a purple sequin evening gown that I wore to the grand reopening of the Lyric Theater in downtown Birmingham, Alabama. How many of you have been to see the beautiful new Lyric Theater? Oh, if you haven't seen it, it's worth the drive up there. This gorgeous theater, vaudeville-era theater, that once was home to Mae West and the Marx Brothers and Milton Berle, but then, after decades of being boarded up and shut down, it was restored and renewed incredibly, looks like now. And more than 100 years after it first opened, there was going to be a grand reopening weekend. 3 shows, singing, dancing, comedy, a guy doing rope tricks with a lariat. and I was asked to be one of the MCs. I want you to wear something that looks like you're a presenter at the Oscars, the director said. And so I bought that form-fitting, full-length evening gown, covered all over in purple sequins that shimmered silver blue, purple black under the stage lights. That dress had a scoop neck and cap sleeves and a little train that the other MC stepped on every time we walked out on stage. But I loved wearing that dress. I wanted to wear that dress again, but where can you wear a purple sequin evening gown? And then I thought, vaudeville. What if I could find a vaudeville performer, a singer, a dancer, an actress, someone who was dazzling and fascinating with an inspiring, heroic, my life is my art kind of story. And I would fall in love with her and fall in love with her story, and I could tell you that story wearing the purple sequin evening gown. And so I went to my public library there in Jefferson County, and I checked out a stack of books about vaudeville-era performers. And that's where I found Vernon and Irene Castle. Have any of you ever heard of them? Any of you remember here? Maybe just kind of in the back of your mind, yeah, Vernon, where? They were ballroom dancers of the 19 teens. They were not the Fred and Ginger of their day. Fred and Ginger were the Vernon and Irene Castle of their day. Vernon and Irene Castle took the shocking idea of dancing with a partner of the opposite sex, possibly a complete stranger, and not just touching that person, but holding that person close and moving rhythmically with that person around a public dance floor, moving to music, not beautiful classical Viennese waltzes, no, to contemporary music, ragtime music. They took that scandalous idea and they made it respectable. There never would have been a Fred and Ginger if it hadn't been for Vernon and Irene Castle paving the way. Vernon was an Englishman. He was tall and thin, 5'11", weighed about 118 pounds. Somebody said he looked like a soda straw with legs. When he was 19 years old, in 1906, he came from England, came over to this country because he wanted to work in vaudeville. He could sing, he could dance, he was funny, likable on stage, he got work. Well, after a few years, he took a few days off, went up to New Rochelle, New York, for a little vacation, and while he was there, he happened to meet a 17-year-old starstruck girl. She was the daughter of a very nice family, upper middle class family. Her father was a physician. But even at age 17, she already knew she did not want a society marriage and a lifetime of cocktails and canasta at the country club. No. She wanted to be a star. Never mind that she couldn't sing, she couldn't dance, she couldn't act, had no talent as a comic. She had style and confidence. And she recognized her ticket in when she met the soda straw frame of Vernon Castle. He was already working in vaudeville. He knew directors. He knew producers. He could get her introduced around. They were married 7 months after they met. He was 24. She was 18. Her name, a great name if you want to be a professional dancer, was Irene Foot. Within 3 years, she was a media sensation. You think we have influencers now? She was 100 years before the time. People, women all over this country were imitating everything she did, the clothes she wore. They all wanted clothes like hers because they were specially made for her, clothes that were all about comfort and freedom of movement at a time when women's clothing was all about corsets and hobbled skirts. She didn't wear her hair the way everybody else did. Everybody else had these long hair piled up. Oh, what a lot of fuss and bother. No, she had her hair cut into a short, blunt bob. And suddenly women all over America are going to barber shops asking for the castle bob, a style held back with bob pins that came to be known as bobby pins. She and Vernon traveled and performed exclusively with a hand-picked all-black ragtime orchestra. She was a social revolutionary, a woman modern before her time. Dazzling and fascinating, yeah. Inspiring and heroic, maybe. The kind of woman whose story you could tell wearing a purple sequin evening gown, absolutely. At least, that's the way it seemed when I was reading those library books and biographies. But all those books and all those biographies hinted that there was more to the story than that. They all hinted that life was not always perfect in those castles in the air. They hinted at a seamy side of ragtime music, a shadowy world of musicians and dancers. And in every one of those library books and biographies, there were footnotes referencing original articles, original documents, original photographs archived at the Billy Rose Theater Collection at the Lincoln Center Performing Arts Branch of the New York Public Library. I wanted to see those original documents. I wanted to see those original articles. I wanted to go to the Lincoln Center Performing Arts Branch of the New York City Public Library, and I knew that when I got there, they were going to let me in because I have the key. I know the password. I have the open sesame. I have a New York Public Library library card. You know, people who keep a passport current, even though they haven't traveled out of the country and have no particular plans to travel, but they just keep the passport current because one day it might take them someplace they want to go. That's what my New York Public Library card is for me. I got it years ago. I renew it every time I go up there because one day that card might take me to archives and collections that would take me someplace I wanted to go. Of course, any library card is like that. Your B.B. Comer library card is like that, is just that kind of passport. My Jefferson County library card is that kind of passport. A library card can take you places you could otherwise never go, let you meet people you could otherwise never meet. And that's what my New York Public Library card was going to do for me now. It was going to take me to New York City, not just New York City 2017. It was going to take me to New York City 1917. It was going to let me time travel back 100 years to meet Vernon and Irene Castle. It was mid-March 2017. I planned a trip to go up there on a Thursday, come back home on a Sunday. I rented an Airbnb studio apartment there in the Upper West Side, everything arranged. I got up there mid-March. It was 73 degrees in New York City. Unbelievable spring weather. I couldn't believe it. I found the apartment, threw in my suitcase, but there was no time to dawdle. No time to enjoy a springtime walk in Central Park. I was only 13 blocks away, 13 of the short blocks away from what might be a new story. I wanted to get to the library. The security guard there at the entrance of the Lincoln Center Performing Arts Branch in his khaki uniform kind of looked like Ralph Cramden from The Honeymooners. He was greeting everybody as we came in. I handed him my tote bag. Can I take this in there with me? Just give me a look in there and a smile, and I'm good, and you're good. Up to the third floor, the Billy Rose Theater Collection. Allison, one of the librarians, offers to help me. Allison looks to be mid-30s. She's got this kind of exotic, asymmetrical, short haircut, black turtleneck sweater, black short skirt, black tights, black boots. She is the picture of the modern public librarian. When I tell her what I'm looking for, she walks me past a row of computer terminals, the digital collection, and steers me toward another room, the card catalog room. She tells me that the card catalog room, all those contents, they're in the process of being digitized too. But for the moment, the card catalog lists the library's collection of what she calls ephemera, original documents, original articles, original photographs. She brings me into this room that is lined with these card catalogs. You've seen these, you know, you recognize these. Oh, where did they all go? These card catalogs that line the wall, these long wooden drawers in a grid, 12 rows high, 120 rows wide, stretching all the way around the room. 1,440 long wooden drawers stuffed with paper index cards that in old-fashioned courier typeface list the ephemera of people who once were living the dream of making it big in showbiz. Allison, the librarian, does not seem the least bit surprised when I tell her I'm looking for information about Irene Castle. I thought that would be so exotic, so unusual. Boy, it is not exotic or unusual in this room. Not in this room where there are all kinds of people sitting at big tables, Allison tells me, researching topics like British music hall performers of World War II, the correspondence of Harold Lloyd, contemporary Irish comedians. Allison walks me alphabetically over to the C's, pulls out a long drawer, indicates the cards, a good 3 inches of cards that list the library's collection for Vernon and Irene Castle. She tells me to fill out a special form with the call numbers of the boxes that contain the items I want to see, and they'll pull them for me. Then I can go into the supervised reading room and look at them, not on microfilm, not on a computer screen. These articles and photographs might be ephemeral, but in the supervised reading room, I can touch them. I can hold them in my hand. I feel like Alice in Wonderland, like Dorothy in Oz, like the kid in the proverbial candy store. Allison goes back to her desk. It takes me a while to sort through 3 inches of index cards, but I finally decide on 4 boxes of materials. I'm going to be there 3 days, 4 boxes. That'll get me through the first day. So I fill in my form. I take it over to Allison. She points to a door where I am to go. The door of the supervised reading room. The supervised reading room is quiet. No trains. Long rows of narrow desks, kind of narrow like these tables. All the seats, just like in this room, facing front, facing the desk of the room supervisor, who is not friendly like Allison. The room supervisor glares at us with a watchful eye, even though there is no way anybody could steal anything from that room. Tote bags, purses, backpacks, all that had to be left in lockers out in the hallway. And the only paper or pencils you can use in that room are the ones given to you by the room supervisor. It kind of feels like taking the SATs in high school, except here you can have a cell phone and there's no math component to worry about. I sit down at one of the tables, wait for about 20 minutes. A side door opens. A librarian wheels in a library cart holding the 4 boxes I have requested, retrieved from some underground storage space. And I think, how in the world do they store all this stuff in Midtown Manhattan on the off chance somebody from Alabama is going to wander in and want to see a picture of Irene Castle? But they do. The room supervisor summons me to her desk, has me sign for the first of the 4 boxes. She looks at me suspiciously. I might not be able to steal anything, but she will not have me manhandling the ephemera. Loose documents are to be kept flat on the table. Have you ever used a book cradle before? I have not ever used a book cradle. I don't even know if I know what is a book cradle. Have I ever seen one? Yes, I have. You probably have too. You know, in church, up on the altar, there's something that holds a book open. Or, you know, in libraries, they used to have ones that were a big, tall stand holding a dictionary, remember those? Well, book cradles come in all kinds of sizes and styles. At the New York Public Library, the book cradles are made of foam, a thick, dense gray foam, kind of like a mattress pad. They're flat on the bottom, that goes on the table, and then there's a V on the top, and the book is placed in the V, and the V holds the book open, but not open so wide that those old spines might crack or break. Loose documents are to be kept flat on the table, not held up in your hands, because that old paper is fragile and brittle and will crumble like an overbaked cookie. I learned this the hard way. When a bottom right-hand corner of an article from the Toledo Times-Sentinel shatters into shards that flutter like confetti to the floor, I try to pick up the sharp spikes of newsprint, but I can't get them all. The room supervisor glares at me. I have flunked supervised reading room on my first day. He taught her how to dance. Irene didn't know how to do anything. Vernon taught her how to dance. One reviewer said, "She dances like thistledown." Another reviewer said, "He makes dancing look as easy as swimming with water wings." They came back to New York City after they got married. They both got work in vaudeville. He was usually the second banana to some top-billed comedian. She was usually in the back row of the chorus, but they both got work in vaudeville. And then in about 1911, a producer approached Vernon, asked him if he would come over to Paris to be part of a musical comedy review he was producing over there. No work for Irene, but Vernon had a job, so they headed over to Paris. But the slapstick comedy did not translate for the French audience, and the show closed in a matter of weeks. And here they were in Paris, no money, no work. Well, they finally kind of got tired of just hanging around doing nothing, decided one night they were going to splurge. They were going to go out to a nightclub. They didn't have enough money to sit there and order drinks all night, so they sat down, ordered one drink each, and then they got up to dance. And when they started dancing, everybody else stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped talking to watch them. And the legend is that there was a Russian prince in the nightclub that night. This was 1911. There were still Russian princes around. And one of them was in that club, and he was so dazzled by their dancing, he sent over to their table a bottle of champagne and 2,000 francs. Now, I want to take a little detour here. I found a video from a little movie they had made called The Whirl of Life. It was just this little video that was a sort of fictionalized version of their career. And this little clip shows this moment when they were discovered. Now, it's an old clip, it's kind of grainy, but it's going to give you an idea of what they looked like and how they danced. And I'm going to ask a favor of you while this clip is playing, if you still have a phone that's on and is going to ring in the next 45 minutes, if you wouldn't mind turning it off. But here's our little clip of Vernon and Irene Castle. So that's a fictionalized version of when they were discovered. And word got out, and Vernon and Irene started to be invited to come and perform at posh parties all over Europe, where ragtime music and ragtime dancing was all the rage. The bunny hop, the grizzly bear, the bunny hug, the turtle trot, all of these dances were a la mode among the high society folks in Europe. People in the United States were doing those dances too, but not high society people. Shop girls, maybe. But in the US, nice people did not trot like a turkey. In the late 1800s, the Industrial Revolution was bringing thousands of young people out of the farms and the villages into the big city to find work. For most of these people, this is the first time they're away from home, the first time they're away from adult supervision, no grandma or maiden aunt to raise an eyebrow about questionable behavior. And so here you have these young folks, they are mostly living in a room in a boarding house, they're working long hours at boring jobs in factories, and they have very little in the way of entertainment. There's no TV, there are no movies, there's no Netflix, there's no social media to occupy all their time and attention. But there were public dance halls. Public dance halls that social reformers and most of the clergy of the day called unsupervised hotbeds of uninhibited ragtime dancing, which is wicked, immoral, and dangerous. In 1892, a book titled From the Ballroom to Hell claimed that dancing was responsible for 81% of the fallen women in Los Angeles. And most of the loose women in New York City had been ruined by jazz. An entrepreneur of the day came up with a wonderful invention. It was called the Princess Lily Girdle. It was a wide leather belt that a woman was supposed to wear tightly wrapped around her waist. It had 3 metal spikes coming out the center to keep her dance partner at a respectable distance. The clergy loved it. It did not sell well. There was a book published in 1904. It was called The Immorality of Modern Dance. Asked this burning question: would a lady with a spark of self-respect place her head upon the shoulder of a man and allow him to encircle her waist with his arms, place his foot between her feet, and clasp her hands in his? The answer apparently was yes. Young people were not only willing to embrace each other, but they also embraced dances with names like the Pollywog Wiggle, the Hippo Hop, the Ostrich Stretch, the Dizzy Drag, the Hoochie Coochie, the Hesitation Waltz, the Fuzzy Wuzzy, the Boston Dip, the Chicken Flip, the Puppy Snuggle, the Lemon Squeeze, and the Arizona Anguish. The social reformers and clergy of the day were horrified. The editor of the Ladies' Home Journal fired 15 office girls when they were caught doing a turkey trot in the company lunchroom during their noontime break. In 1914, by 1914, there were 700 dance halls, public dance halls in New York City. But most of these public dance halls were in sort of seedy neighborhoods. They were dark, crowded places, and just anybody could go there. And so being caught at a tango tea or two-stepping with a total stranger was social suicide among the elite. So young people of the working classes were having a great time. Young people of the upper classes could only look on with envy until Vernon and Irene Castle came along. Now, we left them over there in Europe. Remember, they're dancing at all these private parties. And while they're over there, they meet a woman named Elizabeth Marbury. Elizabeth Marbury was an American. She happened to be in Europe at the time. She was an agent. She was a theatrical and literary agent, one of the first female agents ever. Some of her literary clients were, you've never heard of these, George Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde, James Barrie, the man who wrote Peter Pan. So she was well connected. Back in New York, she knew the Astors, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts. And when she saw this attractive young couple dancing, she knew that with them under her wing, boy, all three of them could make a dime or two. So she convinced the Castles to rework those dances, make them a little less suggestive, a little more graceful, rename them for an American audience. They called the dances the machiche, that's the one you saw, the one step, the castle walk. And then, bankrolled by Elizabeth Marbury, Vernon and Irene came back to New York and got introduced around to the A-list of New York society. And suddenly, it's not just shop girls that are dipping and twirling on public dance halls. Now, thanks to this attractive, sophisticated, and very married couple, respectable, and thanks to their dance studio, funded by Elizabeth Marbury, where people could go in a kind of tea room, genteel atmosphere to learn the steps of the dances. Well, now the A-list of New York society could cut a rug too. One evening, Vernon and Irene were at a party. They were not performing, they were not entertained, they were just at the party. And Vernon suddenly realized that the band at that party was playing a kind of music he had never heard before. It was this unusual blend, jazz, ragtime, spiritual, symphonic music. The music was being played by a society orchestra, all black, led by composer and conductor James Reese Europe. James Reese Europe was born in Mobile, Alabama, 1880. Both of his parents were musicians. He learned to play the violin, the piano. When he was 22 years old, he went to New York City. He's going to make his name in music. First, he just had to find a job. And the first job he got was just playing piano at a nightclub up in Harlem. And years later, George Gershwin, you've heard of George Gershwin, in his memoir, remembered when he was a kid, his family lived up near Harlem, and on summer nights, he remembered being 7, 8 years old, going and sitting on the curb outside that nightclub for hours, just so he could hear James Reese Europe play. James Reese Europe, in 1910, founded a very unusual organization. It was an all-black organization called the Clef Club, C-L-E-F, like a musical clef, the Clef Club. And it was a combination fraternal organization, musicians union, booking agency, songwriting and publishing house. He was president of that organization, and he was also the conductor of the Clef Club Orchestra, which was a 100-piece orchestra that got invited to play their unusual blend of music at Carnegie Hall. And they were so successful, they were invited to come back 2 more times. So 3 successful performances at Carnegie Hall gave them a kind of respectability among white audiences. And they began to be invited to play at events in New York and London and Paris. This was most unusual at the time. At the time, black musicians were typically hired by restaurants and hotels and nightclubs, primarily as waiters and bartenders. They were supposed to serve the food, serve the drinks, then pick up their instruments and entertain the customers. But the Clef Club Orchestra was hired as musicians only. They were respected, they were well paid, even though they still had to make compromises to accommodate the prejudices of their white audiences. I don't know if you've ever heard of U.B. Blake. You ever heard of U.B. Blake? He was a pianist composer of the Ragtime era. U.B. Blake later wrote a memoir. He wrote this. He was an early member of the Clef Club Orchestra. He wrote, "The white bands had their music stands, see, but people wanted to believe that Negroes couldn't learn to read music, but just had a natural talent for it. So we never played with music stands. We'd get all the latest Broadway sheet music, and we'd learn the tunes, memorize them, and rehearse them until we had them all down pat. Never made a mistake. And all the high-tone, big-time folks would say, "Isn't it wonderful how these untrained, primitive musicians can just pick up the latest songs instantly without being able to read music?" The truth was the James Reese Europe gang were music-reading sharks. If a fly landed on a sheet of music so it looked like a note, that fly got played. In addition to his 100-piece orchestra, James Reese Europe also had a smaller group, a 15 or 18-piece group called the Society Orchestra, and they played at smaller parties, private parties, and that's the kind of party they were playing at when Vernon Castle heard them. And Vernon was so taken by this jazz, ragtime, spiritual, symphonic music blend, he went up and asked James Reese Europe if he and his musicians would play for their performances. And Europe agreed, and from that point on, when the Castle signed a contract to perform, it was in the contract that they would only perform to the live music of the James Reese Europe Society Orchestra. This was most unusual. They were the first white entertainers to contractually include black musicians as part of their act. James Reese Europe would go on to become one of the most famous band leaders in the country. In 1917, when the United States got involved in World War I, he and some of his musicians and others from up around the Harlem area enlisted, went over to France and performed as a regimental band. Along with being soldiers, they became known as the Harlem Hellfighters. They came home at the end of the war to a hero's welcome back in 1919. Less than 1 year after he got home, James Reese Europe was killed in a most unfortunate accident. His was the first public funeral of an African American in New York City, and he is buried in Arlington Cemetery. Now, once again, I have a little detour for us. I found a clip, a video clip, that tells more about the Harlem Hellfighters and their role in World War I. I really think it's worth seeing. So this is about an 8-minute clip. Again, it's kind of grainy, but 8-minute clip.
Jazz seemed to so much capture the absurdity of the modern world. Because, of course, the modern world had become absolutely absurd because of World War I.
As Americans prepared for war with Germany, African Americans living in Harlem persuaded the governor of New York to grant them their own unit, the 15th Infantry Regiment. They would also need their own regimental band. The man who was asked to lead it was James Reese Europe, the best-known orchestra leader in New York, who had begun to incorporate elements of jazz into his infectious, syncopated ragtime music. The regiment arrived in France on New Year's Day, 1918. Europe and his men played the Marseillaise with such drive and excitement that the waiting French crowd took a while to recognize it. American officers were so impressed with Europe's unique sound that they sent the band on a tour of army camps and French villages. They played French and American marches, plantation melodies, and the song Europe had made famous, the Memphis Blues.
With a soul-rousing crash of cymbals, cornet and clarinet players began to manipulate notes in that typical rhythm which no artist has ever put down on paper. Then, as the drummers struck their stride, their shoulders shaking in time, the audience could stand it no longer. The jazz germ hit them, and it seemed to find the vital spot, loosening all muscles and causing what is known in American as an eagle rocking it. And I am satisfied that American music will one day be the world's music. Private Noble Sissel.
French and British band leaders were convinced that Europe's men were using trick instruments. Otherwise, they said, such sounds were not possible. On April 20th, 1918, Lieutenant James Reese Europe accompanied a French night patrol across no man's land under heavy enemy fire and became the first African-American officer to face combat during the war. The men of the 15th Regiment would survive 191 days of fierce combat, receive the Croix de Guerre, and be chosen by the French High Command to lead the Allied forces to the Rhine. By the end of the war, 171 men of the 15th Infantry were decorated for bravery, more than from any other American regiment. The men took special pride in the name the French gave them, the Hellfighters. And when they came home at last in February 1919 for a victory parade up Fifth Avenue to Harlem, New Yorkers, black and white, poured into the streets to cheer them. That spring, Europe and his Hellfighters band cut 24 records and made a triumphant tour of the country, spreading their hot new music and drawing big, cheering, integrated crowds everywhere they went.
And James Reese Europe is similar to many of the great figures in American music in that he's always trying to synthesize elements around him that seem to disagree. And when people start to hear this band, a concert band, which is usually playing in a kind of strict, stiff way, playing this loose, kind of grooving, lilting fashion, they can't believe what they're hearing. Man, everybody is going crazy. And James Reese Europe is looking at the response of the people, and he's saying to himself, let's do this some more.
James Reese Europe had big plans for peacetime, to merge jazz and ragtime into a wholly new kind of African-American music. We won France by playing music which was ours and not a pale imitation of others, he said. And if we are to develop in America, we must develop along our own lines. On the morning of May 9th, 1919, Europe was in Boston, scheduled to lay a wreath at the base of the memorial to the 54th Massachusetts Volunteers, the first black regiment to fight in the Civil War. But the evening before the ceremony, Europe was confronted by one of his drummers, a high-strung man named Herbert Wright. The two men had words. Wright accused his boss of treating him unfairly, then suddenly stabbed Europe in the neck with a penknife. That night, James Reese Europe bled to death. The loss was incalculable, said the New York Times. Ragtime may be Negro music, but it is American Negro music, more alive than much other American music. And Europe was one of the Americans who was contributing most to its development. The city of New York gave him an official funeral. the first ever granted to a black citizen. Thousands of mourners, black and white, turned out to see the procession pass from Harlem down the west side to St. Mark's Episcopal Church. He took the colored of this city from their porters' places, said the priest, and raised them to positions of importance as real musicians.
So, that's how the story ended, but in 1914, James Reese Europe was the personal band leader for Vernon and Irene Castle. That year, 1914, the Castles headed out on a whirlwind performing tour, 30 cities in 28 days, Boston to Omaha. They took with them 6 assistant dancers and James Reese Europe's 18-piece society orchestra, and they traveled in a privately commissioned 3-car train, an engine and 2 other cars. They traveled that way in a private car so they could eat on the car, drink on the car, sleep on the car, and not have to deal with the hassle of trying to find accommodations for black musicians and white dancers. The entourage was not, in a way, not truly integrated. There were no white musicians, there were no black dancers, but this was a professional partnership that was pretty unusual in 1914. So I'm reading about all of this and looking at the pictures of all of this, sitting there in that supervised reading room, and I'm thinking, wow, there's another whole thread to follow here. U.B. Blake, Noble Sissle, Scott Joplin, Ragtime, the way Ragtime would change American music forever. But all of that is in another bunch of boxes to be requested on another special form and to be looked at another day. As it was, I had 4 boxes, and it was almost the end of the first day. Almost the end of the first day, and I had gotten through 1/4 of 1 box. I had 2 more days, 3 3/4 boxes left to go. A cold front moved in overnight. It was 42 degrees the next morning as I headed down Columbus Avenue to get to the library when it opened at 10:30 a.m. The Ralph Cramden security guard is joking, laughing with everybody going in, all the regulars. When it's my turn, he says, "Hey, you got that smile for me again?" It's only my second day. He makes me feel like I'm a regular too. Up to the 3rd floor, Billy Rose collection. Allison is busy at her desk. It doesn't matter. I know what to do. I go into the supervised reading room. The boxes are waiting for me. The second day is not at all like the first day. The first day was all delighted discovery. The second day is a hard slog through documents, articles, and photographs. Their pictures were everywhere. On theater posters, newspaper articles, magazine covers. Vanity Fair magazine had a contractual agreement that it would include 7 images of Irene Castle. 7 images of Irene Castle in every issue. We think we got NIL now with college football players. They use their name, image, and likeness to sell everything: shoes, hats, gloves, jewelry, perfume, cigarettes. Thanks to their product endorsements, their dance performances, and their dance studio, in 1914, they were bringing home about $5,000 a week. That's 1914 money. The typical American worker at the time was making about $700 a year. They're making $5,000 a week. They spent their money on jewelry, furs, expensive animals, expensive automobiles, extensions to multiple mansions so they could build kennels and stables for their 24 dogs, 5 horses, 2 monkeys, a donkey, and a whole array of weird animals that, to be fair, they rescued from defunct vaudeville animal acts. The picture that emerges of Irene Castle on the second day is not an attractive one. She is rude to the reporters who made her famous. Will this take long? Interviews bore me, you know. She and Vernon were really difficult to work with. All the people who hired them to come perform had to put up with the fact that they traveled with an entourage of animals that included Rastus, their pet monkey, who wore stage makeup and spats. They would also bring along at least 5 or 6 guinea pigs and Vernon's German Shepherd dog that he bought for $3,000. He saw the owner walking that dog one day, just like the dog, offered him $3,000 on the spot. In 1914, Vernon Castle paid $3,000 for a dog. There's a picture of Irene in high heels doing a turtle trot on the back of a live 700-year-old turtle who does not look happy to be included in that stupid publicity stunt. I begin to read about how those castles in the air came crashing down to earth. I read about her 4 marriages, her contentious divorces, the bitter battle over alimony from her 3rd husband. How can I possibly keep up with my facials, manicures, and massages on $35 a month? It's impossible. I won't be able to have them made 5 days a week. By the end of the second day, I am out of love with Irene Castle. And I'm not the only one. Vanity Fair magazine, along with their pictures of her, included this little poem. Men buy boots like Vernon's, females ape Irene, whether they be 66 or only sweet 16. Irene Castle bonnets, bracelets, belts, and coats cram the streets, the buses, the cars, the ferry boats. Castles in the subway, castles on the L. How I wish the castles were both of them in Spain. I was starting to feel the same way. I had come all this way looking for someone dazzling and fascinating, and Irene Castle was that, to be sure, but she was also selfish and spoiled, just a flawed human being like me, like most of us. It's my fault. She never claimed to be a saint or a social revolutionary. I'm the one who wanted her to be inspiring and heroic. I decide I just have to accept her for who she was, but that doesn't mean I have to want to tell you her story. I can just put her back in the box, along with the purple sequin evening gown. I'm not expecting much from my 3rd day, but I have one more day in New York. I got one more box to go through. I might as well go through it. And so I do. And that's when I find something I didn't expect to find. I find Vernon. Not just Irene's husband, but the inspiring hero I wanted her to be. He's there in the 4th box. The 4th box contains just one thick black scrapbook that has a label on the cover that says, "In memory of Captain Vernon Castle." And the scrapbook is full of articles and photographs describing how he died a hero's death and was buried with full military honors. And I think, what Vernon Castle are they talking about? The fancy dance man with the silk stockings and the $3,000 dogs? Yeah, that Vernon Castle, who was also still a British citizen. And when World War I broke out, he felt like he needed to go back home and help defend his country. And so even though he and Irene were at the height of their fame, in 1914, he started to take flying lessons. And then in 1916, he announced that he was leaving the tour, leaving the performances, going back home to England to fight the Hun. You can imagine the Society reporters had a field day with that announcement. Oh, yes, they wrote, as soon as Mr. Castle's manicure dries, he's going to scare the Germans out of their wits, perhaps by performing a poorly done tango. But he meant it. And in 1916, he went back to England and enlisted in the Royal Flying Corps, volunteering to fly World War I era airplanes, which were basically big paper kites. I don't want to talk about this while that's ringing. Because World War I pilots, I want you to really understand what he was signing up for. In 1916, a pilot newly enlisted in the Royal Flying Corps had a life expectancy of 17 days. That's what he volunteered for. He managed to survive almost 2 years as an aerial photographer. He flew 300 combat missions, shot down 2 German airplanes, was awarded the Croix de Guerre for bravery. And then in 1918, he was promoted to captain and made an instructor, sent over to train Canadian pilots at their winter training base outside Fort Worth, Texas. In February of 1918, the war still has, oh my gosh, it's got 9 more months to go. He took a student pilot up on a training run and quickly saw that he needed to take over control of the plane. They were about to collide with another student aircraft. He took control of the plane, saw there was no way to avoid a crash, but instead of crashing with the other airplane, he maneuvered the plane so that it hit the ground, and when it did, he was the only one killed. The other 2 students, the other pilot, walked away unharmed. He had beaten unbeatable odds, surviving 22 months of World War I air combat, and then died on a training field far from battle, saving other people's lives. He was 30 years old. I put the scrapbook back in the box, handed the box back to the room supervisor, got my things out of the locker, said goodbye to Ralph Cramden, headed up into the crush of people walking up Columbus Avenue, heading back home. I would be flying back home to Birmingham in the morning. Had I found what I was looking for? Had I fallen in love? Did I have a new story to tell you? Yes, but not the story I thought it would be. I had fallen in love, but not with Irene Castle, not even with Vernon Castle. When I got home and went through all of my notes and papers, what I discovered were pages and pages and pages of notes about the library. I had fallen in love all over again with the public library, with the very idea, imagine, of a public library where people can come and gather and hear lectures and read books and access all kinds of resources that would let them meet a World War I pilot or a ragtime dancer or an Irish comedian or anything else they were looking for. I found that I was, in fact, dazzled and fascinated by these amazing places open to the public. I was inspired by the heroes who make these places work every single day. The donors, the friends, the enlightened public officials who keep places like this open and public and free, but mostly the real heroes of this story. The local businesses, like a particular bank I could name, that sponsors programs like this, free to anybody who chooses to show up. The heroes like the staff, the librarians, who plan these programs, who suggest books, who answer endless questions, who set up the chairs, who turn the lights out when we all go home. They are the real heroes of this story. That is the love story I wanted to tell you. I love the public library. Now, I did get to tell you the story. I didn't get to wear the purple sequin evening gown. But I did get to bring in my purse my favorite accessory, the one that goes with absolutely everything, my library card. I hope you have one too and use it every day. Thank you.
That's good news that you love us, because we've been in love with you for a long time, Miss Dolores. And so one more hand for Miss Dolores Hydock. we have always laughed that it doesn't matter what you see Dolores do, she does a fantastic job with it. And we laughed the last time when she told her story, and I thought, this has got a dragon in it? I don't like these fantasy stories. And then I was on the edge of my seat. So it doesn't matter what she does a phenomenal job. Thank you for people like you that go the extra mile to do the research, to get valid facts, to bring us stories that sometimes go untold. And thank you to the people also that go to the extra links to make sure that these documents get preserved and that they're accessible. So thank you all so much for being here. I want to thank Miss Dolores one more time. She does have some CDs for sale here. If you want to stop by and say hello to her, please come back next week. Next week is our last program in this series, and we have Dr. Alex Colvin, and she'll be with us. She's done several programs before, and she's phenomenal. She's with the Alabama Department of Archives and History, and she'll be here to tell a wonderful story about Alexander McGilvery. I also want to say one more time, Mr. Chris in the back, thank you so much to First Bank of Alabama. As Miss Dolores said, it makes these programs possible, so thank you. Thank you all for being with us. We'll see you next week.